So I'm happy to have David Taberio on again. Um, I know we talked a lot before, but still, can you like introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Eric. My name's Dave Taberio. Work full-time for the Gray Institute. I've been teaching courses with Gary Gray for over 40 years. So that means we're both old. Um, my background is physical therapy, and then got a master's degree and finally a PhD in sport biomechanics at UConn. Taught physical therapy there for a while, and now I'm just trying to help people understand function.
Nice, nice, nice. So obviously you guys been doing this for a long time, but a lot of professional like basketball team or like hockey team, they're just starting to do this. Um, I want to ask like your opinion about like obviously the whole biomechanics lab that the camera can't really track transverse plane movement and frontal plane movement. It's really good at sagittal plane movement. Uh thoughts on like how you think we could get something out of the I don't know the lab.
All right, well, that's an interesting and I believe a tough question to answer. But my background in the lab is that I developed one while I was teaching physical therapy, and we had two force plates and eight camera motion capture system and EMG. So I've been exposed to all of that, not only in our own lab but others. Um, the issue is what type of system do you have? Um, and you certainly, if you have a good system, you should be able to do frontal and transverse plane as well as sagittal. If you're using one of these newer AI aided systems that have a single camera, then to some degree there's a question of the absolute accuracy of the numbers that you get. Um, the more AI works at taking 3D information at the same time capturing something in 2D, and then does the interpolation of that, it will get better. The weakest plane is always the transverse plane, even with fancy motion capture systems, whether it's 8 cameras, 12 cameras, or whatever. Then part of the reason for that is the statistical or the mathematical manipulation of the raw data, in which it's done in a sequence typically that is sagittal, frontal, and then transverse. So any errors get magnified as you get to the transverse plane. And the transverse plane is also kind of like the stepchild because the way the marker systems are put on, if you're using a marker system on the segments, they're typically, not always, but typically not set up to capture transverse plane motion, just the way the markers are oriented. Now, there are other systems that don't use markers uh, on the segments. They use 3D goniometers that connect one segment to the other and cross the joint. But the typical system that most people are using captures the motion of the bone segments, and then the actual joint motions are calculated from that. So it's a calculation. The joint motion is not measured directly. Um, and then with the force plate, they get into Newtonian physics and how to calculate moments. And uh, all of that information is really good, and it's going to get better and better. I think what your listeners might need to hear is there are errors in all of this. So when they see data or research articles from very sophisticated labs and also research that's done well, doesn't mean there aren't errors in it. There are guaranteed errors in the numbers. And so we have to blend science with art and our eyes and what we see in practical application of experience.
Mm. And I know baseball been doing this for a long time, like 10, 15 years ahead of us. They've been doing pitching and hitting, also in-game capturing the data. So when it comes to like basketball, like what would you think would be a a better battery of testing?
Well, first of all, let me say that I haven't had a lot of experience in doing that. And soccer's been doing it, or soccer football, and they're tracking speeds, and they're also looking at the status of the athlete's physical system and whether they're overtrained or undertrained and all of that. Um, when you look at when you say battery of tests, what comes to mind from me is either a system that tells you when someone's fatigued and potentially at risk of injury, or someone who has been injured and we have to determine whether they're ready to return to play. And I think some of these real in-game captures will be helpful, but I don't consider myself an expert in how to apply those. But certainly, with regard to return to play, I have some ideas about what types of things the strength and conditioning teams and the athletic trainers and the therapists and the physicians should be employing in order to make those decisions. And then ultimately, there's not one test again that's going to do that. And some people will like certain tests more than others. But I think you have to have a battery of movement tests to go along with some other physical characteristics capturing. Like you might say, I want to check vertical jump, or you might want to have a reaction time thing with cones. And I think all of those things can play a role. And I think that each practitioner within each team will generally decide on what they think are valuable tests to use. I don't think we're there yet. I think there might be a deficit or a lack of understanding of what it takes to come back from injuries on all three levels, the physical, the neuroperceptual, and even the behavioral psychological are going to influence someone's ability to come back and not only not get injured, but to be able to perform at an elite level, which is a challenge.
Mm. Um, Obviously, like I can't share the whole variety of tests the NBA do, but like they use counter and jump, drop jump, and different lunges, right? So uh this is just I don't know, maybe crazy idea, but like some some people would say like it's useless to do the lunges, for lunge, lateral lunge. What are your thoughts on that? And like if we're gonna do the lunges, like maybe do the 3D map lunges in the biomechanics lab and try to see what can we get out. Is that a great idea?
Well, again, I would say that if someone can do a lunge, that would be very far from the physical requirements needed to go out and play professional basketball. So, as a test of where they are, it might be valuable. As a test of return to play, I would think you're going to need something much more dynamic. Um, jumps, uh, box drops, all of those things that are dynamic and loading can have a play an important role. I guess let me give you my thoughts on this, and again, I will say that I don't consider myself an expert, but I think any team has to have some what I would call general or return to play movement tests. They may want to have strength tests, they may want to have bench press tests, they may want to have squat tests. Nothing wrong with that. But when you have to ask, is a squat test might or a single leg squat test, let's say comparing left to right because right side was injured. That's a nice comparison, but it doesn't mean that that force that they or strength that they built out up is going to be utilized during functional play. And so I think no matter what sport you're doing, there should probably be a general functional return to play test. And you know, because you're a gift fellow, that the Gray Institute has something called 36 360s. And it's a series of, you can do it jumping on two legs, and that's a training thing, but probably wouldn't be good enough to say you're ready to go back and play. You can do it jopping, which is an alternating a jump and a hop, and that wouldn't is a transition to ultimately what would be a return to play general test, no matter what you're doing, and that would be the 36 360 hopping, in which someone hops and then rotates 90 degrees and then does another hop in that position, then rotates another 90 degrees and does another hop in that position. So by the time you're done and you rotate all the way around in one direction and then rotate all the way around in the other direction, you've done anterior and posterior hops, you've done rotational hops, you've done lateral side to side hops. So you've incorporated all of those into a single test. Now, what does that test tell you? Well, you can do it a couple different ways. One is to tell the person doing it, we want you to be safe, but we want you to move along this line as you do this test as far as you feel reasonably comfortable. And then you would be comparing an uninjured leg with an injured leg. Okay, now that's not a great test for someone who has shoulder problems, but if it's a lower extremity test, it's really good. And that what it's very helpful for is when athletes think that they are ready to return to play because they don't have pain anymore and they think they're doing pretty well, but you as a strength and conditioning coach might say, I'm not sure. Well, when you're talking to an athlete who wants to play, I'm not sure is not good enough. And the team and the coach or the physician is going to say, well, what do you mean I'm not sure? So this general test is an objective measure. And so if there's a, let's say on the good leg, they made 100 feet, and on the involved leg, they made 75 feet of distance. Well, they may not have had any trouble falling. They may have looked like they had pretty good control, but they have a 25% deficit on that side, even though they have no pain and can do all of these hops. So that's an objective test that says you're not ready. Now, and I have utilized that when I was at the University of Connecticut with a basketball player who played professional basketball. They were drafted in the first round. But during their college career, they had an injury and went through training, and we went through specific functional training. And this individual thought they were ready. And we did it holding the ball over their head with two hands so that if they were getting a rebound or were coming down from landing, that made it more of a challenge. But we felt that that was specific to basketball. And the deficit was more than 25%. It was 40%. And so that distance was way down. Now, another way to do it, if the distance is the same or you have them go through this, how long it takes the person to go through it. And that you could use both tests, but the time it takes to go through and complete the whole thing gives you a great measure of something that you objectively see their control is not good and the quality of the movement isn't the same. But how do you objectively answer that question? But you typically see when people are not doing well, it takes them a lot longer to execute the movements. And so there's a big time difference as well. So either one or both of those two tests really show something. And another story that would highlight this is when I was rehabbing a high school soccer player who was very good, played Division I college soccer eventually, but in high school, they had an eversion injury of their medial deltoid ligament at the ankle with a slight tear of a bony fragment. And so they actually did surgery to reattach this. And it was the junior year for this person. I hope I haven't told this story on your podcast before,
No.
but the we wanted to get him back real quick. And so I thought I was a superstar in rehab. And he was doing so well so quickly. I did a videotape and I sent it to the orthopedic surgeon and said, I think he's ready. And indeed, he let him go back. And when I talked to this player at the end of he played a couple more weeks in his junior season, I said, how did it feel? And he said, well, it really didn't feel right. And so I'm thinking, well, I don't quite understand that. So I went back and looked at the video. And indeed, what the video showed was he could do any functional test I asked him, but the time in transition, the load to explode, as we talk about, was greatly delayed. It was so much slower. So the time it took him to decelerate the movement, the excursion of the joint motion to decelerate it before you could go in the other direction was much greater. And so the time to come back, he wasn't ready. Physically, you could have tested strength, you could have tested all the functional tests, but he wasn't ready. If I had put him on that 36 360, I would have seen the difference, but I saw it on the videotape. And so there's this whole reactive thing that not only do we have to put people through drills, but it identifies deficits. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, how do we get rid of that deficit? Is it more of the same? Or do we have to have different aspects of our training program? They're going to emphasize getting in and out quickly because that's the real mark of a great explosive athlete. So if I
Mhm.
were to use the example of Michael Jordan, he didn't go into this big squat when he was getting ready to jump. He had this quick move in all three planes, as Gary Gray would say, loading the system as quick as he could in all three planes throughout his whole entire body. And he could get up faster than anyone. And so the idea here is that we've got to either whether post injury or pre injury, we have to have a system that utilizes functional movements that works on reaction time.
Hmm. I,
And there are measurements to do that. So that's where some of the force plate stuff is great. Some of the other things are going to give us indications, video, 3D. Those are the things that you can utilize to say, how is this person doing and are they ready to return?
I'm happy that you shared this story because I think you kind of share the same story on uh one of the Zoom call on GIFs. And I think I write down uh plyometric with transformational zone, which is really cool. And I think that's also like one of the missing link with traditional like performance training. Um, talk to me about like how how can we train that or and like tradition like how can
Well,
we implement that?
yeah, I'm not sure I know the best answer, but what I do know is that in building on what I talked about just before is then you go to the sport the person's in and you have to have activity specific functional movements, not the general ones. The 36 360 isn't good enough. You have to be able to, if you have deficits on that, you're going to have deficits on when they go to their functional specific stuff. So you have to do things that are related to, as we say at the Gray Institute, the transformational zones of that activity or that sport. And the problem is that it's not just one, there's lots of them. In your example in basketball, there's landing from above, whether they're dunking the ball or getting a rebound, they're often landing on one leg, and so that's something you would have to incorporate into a return to play test, and you would have to train for that by tweaking things in and out. You have the added issue of in that environment there's somebody else bumping them and running into them, so you would want to incorporate something into the training that would mimic that. But in terms of specifically the reactive time, Sometimes there are light things. You can use some of the systems that use lights. You can do stuff where you're limiting how far they can go down. Because someone that really has to use a lot of range of motion to load the system is not ready to return. The body's going to use as much range as it needs to decelerate the loading motion and then explode out of there. More is not better there, as we were talking about before. So trying to get people to do it quicker, you could do it on a metronome thing, where you do repeated hops, but you increase the rate. So you're getting them to go faster and faster and faster. In a basketball specific thing, it might be lunge to balance, which we call leaps, which you'd go from one side to the other. And you could use a metronome or a light to speed that up. And then you have to add in not just the same plane forward, back, side to side to rotate, but you mix all those in. So you have to do it. And then you start to tweak out some of the things by either, what you do with the arms. And then ultimately you really need to say that it's an environment that you can't control. You might be throwing the ball at them. You might be doing other things that they have to catch it low or high, and all those things. You utilize all those things, but it has to be. It may have to be part of the return to play. In order to say, and people aren't going to like that because they want to get someone better faster. But a lot of the traditional return to play things, comparing strength on one side to the other, we would believe at the Gray Institute have deficits in it because you can see someone come back and they're all set, but their play suffers. And part of the reason their play suffers is their neuroperceptual system hasn't been trained to do all these things in a less than optimal environment. When you're by yourself, it's optimal. The person can organize their system and all their resources of the system in the easiest way for them. And then when they're in a different environment or there's somebody else there or the ball doesn't come to the right place, now they have to be able to organize those resources in a very different way. And have we trained them to do that? And so we have people who come back and they don't get re-injured and they're saying, no, I feel good. I don't, it doesn't hurt. Yet at the same time, their performance suffers. And so maybe you let them come back and play, but they still have to be training on that because their system's not ready to be optimal for sure. So you have those external physical forces. You have, again, the neuroperceptual system and the proprioceptors are so critical. But the thing that is even just as critical, I believe, and you're learning that in gifted, and the behavioral part of that. If you don't take the person through the things that they recognize, psychologically recognize, as well as their body recognizes as authentic to the sport, the body senses, I got injured. It's not that they're weak or they're not that they're, quote, afraid. It's at a subconscious level that the body recognizes that it was injured. And until it's taken through all of the challenges of that sport, it will limit what the person can do because it's not ready. And the person has no knowledge of that. It's not a conscious thing. And so that's our job. Your job and my job is to make sure we take them to all the extremes of what are involved in that particular sport. What it's not just landing, as it's cutting, a jab step and coming back. It's diving on the floor. There's all kinds of things that we really need to take someone through. But how do you do it? It's a step by step process, as you know. It's all built on success. It's all a gradual increase in the demand of the task. So you know that Gary talks about there's tweaking in and resources and tweaking out resources. So when someone's injured, you tweak in as many muscular resources and range and everything so they can be successful. But then you have to tweak those out because there are going to be times when they don't have access to those resources. The environment, the task, and everything is changing, and so they can't do that. And so, unless we train them with those resources out, we're doing them a disservice. At the same time, we're as a strength and conditioning coach, you're going to change the demand of the task. You're going to either add load or you're going to ask them to jump a greater distance or you're going to have them hop down from a higher height. You're going to change the demand of the task. And it's the interplay between the resources that you allow them to have and the demand of the task that really allows us to successfully take someone from, quote, hey, I did that and it didn't hurt and you did it well and the quality of it was good and it looked good. Well, that's the perfect scenario, and they can bring in all their resources and it's an environment that's clean. That's only half the job. The rest of the job is now, well, when that isn't the case, how successful can they be? And I'm not saying you hold out athletes till they're perfectly ready. That's a tough decision. And they're not going to wait and wait and wait when they're feeling good. But we have to continue to train them to not only prevent either a re-injury, and sometimes, as you know, more often an injury somewhere else because they're protecting the original injury, but also at the same time performance. They go hand in hand. They're not separate things. And so we have to continue to challenge them even when they return to play because they're probably going to return to play before they're ultimately ready.
Nice, nice. I like it. Uh, I'm happy you you brought up return to play because think in the past like we swing far too far on the functional side, which is speed and power, and then we swing back to like the local like the biology. Like I think ACL is a big one that people talk about is like if we do a no matter it's like a patella tendon graft or hamstring graft, the tendon needs 2 years to make it to make that no your body needs 2 years to make that tendon into a ligament. So people have been trying to like hold athlete back as long as it possible, but at the same time like the longer you hold them back, the longer it's gonna get harder for the athlete to return play. And one thing I learned from you guys is when you guys talk about return play, you don't just talk about like the muscle, around that area. You also talk about function and proprioceptor. Talk to me about like uh why do we need to be aggressive as possible in a safe way to return play?
Right. It goes back to a real old saying when Gary and I used to do chain reaction. Uh, we would, and even before that, way at the very beginning with another gentleman, Mike Whitmer, we would say, rule number one, do no harm. Rule number two, be as aggressive as you can be without doing harm, without breaking rule number one. And so that's the skill. That's what makes us either good or bad at our jobs. And I think that we need we need to recognize. And again, we've done two previous podcasts. Not sometimes, all the time, I'm going to forget what I've said before. But I think with regard to what you posed, the first thing we have to realize is the more stress we can put into a healing tissue, the quicker it's going to heal and the better it's going to heal. But there's no doubt that we can overdo that and injure that tissue. And so that's when early on, when this tissue is healing, we need to protect it, but we need to still provide some stress to that tissue. So, because in an ACL graft, that whole tissue is going to die and be replaced. Now they're doing this new internal, scaffold grafting and the original grows. That's a different story. But it's still going to be underneath the same laws and the physiological rules. You have to stress something in order for the cells to align themselves in the direction they need to be, and all the cross bridges need to be created by the stress. It's no different in bone. If you're an astronaut, you're going to lose bone, and if you don't have weight bearing, the body doesn't know where to lay down the lines for the trabecular lines of the bone, and it's all the same, and everything. So we need load in the tissue for it to heal. Now, the other part of the answer to your question is if you were going to wait till that reconstructed ligament was fully recovered, it would be a long, long time. And they used to say a year, and now they're saying 2 years, and they're going longer and longer. But sometimes we rely a little too much on the science and lose the practicality of it. Now, if you were to let someone go out and practice or load and the graft would tear, well, that would mean no, we're not doing anything for 2 years. But the reality is there's different healing times for the sutures, any screws that are put in, the tissue itself, all different healing times. And so what we would do and Gary Gray was the first person I've heard say this is we're going to rehab it like there wasn't a reconstruction, that there is no tissue there. We're going to build the rest of the body up so well that there isn't excessive stress on that. And it's not going to fail, but it is going to be getting some stress. And therefore, it's going to be maturing at a faster rate than if we did nothing. Now, that's the first half of the equation I talked about before, because if you really want that tissue to mature, we're going to have to start eventually tweaking things out. Now, we don't know when that perfect time would be if we're talking a chronological time. And there probably is not a good idea to have a thing that at 2 months you do this and at 3 months you do that. And because everybody's different. Everybody's going to heal differently and everybody's going to function differently and everybody's proprioceptive ability is different. So that's why doing the functional stuff is so critical at determining the rate of progression. Now, don't get me wrong, you made an important point. We have to go back and build foundational strength. And even before that, we might have to build range of motion. We might have to get the motion back, and we might have to then build strength in the individual muscles. And then we may have to, but all the downtime is taking away from the strength of the other muscles around the body. And you know it's an integrated system. It's not one joint with one or two muscles. And we have to, yeah, you don't want to overemphasize the functional at the risk of not building the foundational resources that the person needs. But if you don't do functional movements you can't control the stress. How do you control the stress if you can't tweak in other things? Are you going to put that person on an isokinetic machine or a knee extension machine and say, okay, when are we going to put tension into that knee? First of all, you got to worry about the quad tendon and the part that was taken out, that has to heal. And then our patella tendon, and then you got to worry about the new thing that's being put in and we know it's going to die. So if you haven't built up the body during this formative stage, it's sort of like saying, can you be aggressive? Or if not, you're really pushing it down the road. You're pushing the ball way down the road. As you said, the longer we wait, the worse it's going to be. And that's just not physically, that's neuroperceptually. System doesn't know what to do. And we know that that's critical because the forces of function without the muscles coming in at the right time, they tear ligaments. When they test ligaments in isolation, the normal forces of an activity like the thrower and the ulnar collateral ligament, it would tear every time once they threw one pitch. But you have the bony stability and you have the muscular forces that all come into play. And so we need to be able to have a progressive program, and everybody's going to have a different timetable, but it shouldn't be set in advance. It should be more a sequence that says when they can do this, we go to this. And when they can do that, they go to that. And then you have your criteria. Do they have to do it 10 times? Or do they have to do it 20 times? Or do they have to have the speed that they do it at? All of those things can be set by each individual practitioner. But to just say, at this time, based on this study of this ligament, that the tissues are going to be a year and a half. That doesn't make any sense, and it's based on science. But I probably told this story before. You've heard it somewhere, but in the 70s, when the Cincinnati Sports Medicine Group and others were doing all this research on the ACL, they came up with a true fact that the ACL is most lax in 30 degrees of knee flexion. And it gets more taut when you extend the knee and it gets more taut when you flex the knee. True fact. So they took that fact and they applied it to their post-surgical rehabilitation, and they casted the knee in 30 degrees of flexion for 6 weeks. And it casts in 6 weeks. Now, in this day and age, that would be considered pure malpractice. That was state of the art. And so after they get out of the cast, they had to then restore the motion because it hadn't moved in 6 weeks. But not only that, as you were restoring the motion, you were taking this ligament that was partially healed, this reconstructed ligament tissue that was partially healed and was tight, and then you were stretching it out. You were actually tearing it because it had to get longer in order to allow the motion to occur. And the only way that that changed was a group of skiers said, "This is nuts." They ripped off their casts and they were living in the mountains and they started doing jumps and hops up and down the mountain. And then they come in to see the doctor, and the doctor would be shocked that the cast was off, and they were just as shocked to see how great the person was doing. So science can lead us down the wrong road. And I would, you know, just my opinion, this thing of when the ligament really heals and you have to wait that long, that's science that's leading us down the wrong road.
Nice. I like it. I like it. So just to clarify, they ripped off
They took
ripped
off
off
the cast themselves, didn't pay any
like
attention, just did the, just
before
whatever.
weeks, before 6 weeks and started jumps. That
Way,
was
way before, way
Mm.
before.
And they have great result in terms of like rehab.
Yeah, they did. They got back much faster. They did more things. They were back skiing sooner because they ignored the protocol based on science.
Then why aren't we doing this more?
Well, a lot of people are, some aren't. It depends on who the physicians are, what they believe, how much they understand about functional training, how much they might understand what we call integrated isolation and isolated integration. You know, that we're going to protect something, we're going to isolate it into protection at the beginning, but we're going to do it, we're going to protect it while it's integrated. But then when we can eventually isolate it out. So we can do it, we can keep it integrated, but protect it. So it's isolated. We have, you're either tweaking in or tweaking out. It's a game that we understand, and that's the way to be the most aggressive. But we're beginning to understand, and we made mistakes when we were just tweaking in and we weren't tweaking out. And now we're getting to understand more of the things we can do to really emphasize the neurological, proprioceptive stuff that can even make what we can do safer and better. We understand that we have to take the people to the place where they were injured, not away from the place they were injured. And that happened with that same group when they were saying their post ACL reconstructive protocol was never let the knee go in because they knew when the knee went into valgus and rotated, that's what tore it. So don't go there. Train the people to do that. That was the science was the ligament tore when the knee went through this motion. The terrible application was don't let your knee go in there. Applied functional science application is we're going to make sure your knee goes in there, but we're going to do it in a gradual, progressive way based on success. So here's the funny thing. They reported all of these things where that post ACL reconstruction, the people developed a varus thrust of their knee. It was going in the other direction. And there was this thing that you had to watch out for. Well, guess what? The training created the varus thrust. The idea of not letting the knee go in created the varus thrust. The poor protocol based on science created the varus thrust. And in fact, and again, it seems like I'm picking on them because we all learn over time, but they had a video on the training, and you would think that they had a woman do the jump, the landing hop, and they kept saying, "No, don't let your knee go in. Don't let your knee go in." And I'm thinking, you think you would have chosen someone that was able to prevent their knee from going in for your video, even though that's a not very smart thing to do. Because if you go out and watch anyone play any sport, the knee doesn't stay over the second toe. It just doesn't. You don't have to be a biomechanist. You don't have to even know anything about movement. Watch any event and say, does that knee stay over the second toe? The answer anyone's going to give you is no. So why would we ever want to try to do that? The people's heart was in their right place because they didn't want them to get re-injured. And they didn't, so they wanted to say, don't go where you got injured. We're going to say you have to go where you get injured because you're going to go there. Even if you avoid it in all your training, when you go out and play, you're going to go there. And unless you've trained the muscles to be able to decelerate that, unless you've trained the proprioceptors to turn on the muscles to decelerate it, unless you've trained the muscles and the proprioceptors and the ligament and the fascia, everything to not only decelerate that, but to be able to explode out of there in what we talked about in a quick and dynamic power fashion, then they'll have limited success. They may not get re injured, but I wouldn't bet a lot of money on that. That training program is going to prevent them from getting re-injured because as soon as you take the conscious mind out of it and they're in the heat of the battle and they're moving and they're responding to the other players playing the game and they're reacting and they're not thinking about their knee or controlling their knee or their foot or whatever, then you better have trained them to have that happen automatically. And
Mm.
it goes throughout the whole body. If it's a shoulder problem, you have to train the legs. And we just did a thing where we talked about in chain reaction about proprioception. If you want to protect the knee, you better train the shoulder. Because when this player comes down the court and they're about to plant their right knee to get the ball coming down, being thrown to them in a layup. And when they have to reach back because the ball's not in a perfect spot, and so they're reaching back with their left hand as their right foot is hitting the ground. And now all of a sudden, all that training you did for their posterior lateral hip isn't going to do them any good because that ball is pulling them out. You better have trained their abdominals and their shoulder and everything on the anterior medial aspect of their hip to protect that knee. And that's just not only the muscles and the fascia, that's the proprioceptors. And if you haven't done that, if they get in that position, they got one choice. They either gonna miss the ball and be safe, or they're gonna be behaviorally driven to catch the ball, even their body's saying no, no, no. And then the chances of their getting injured goes way up.
Mm. Nice. I like it. Uh, I think so. Before GIF, obviously I did the membership, which is almost all the courses beside GIF. And
Yep.
one thing I learned during the gift process is how important it is when we talk about like transformational zone, proprioceptor, not just the muscle. Um, and recently I was talking to another biomechanist. I think it's Miami Marlins biomechanist. We were talking about like he was saying like with all these technology, with all the biomechanics lab, with all the camera system, it's useless if we don't like apply motor learning or don't apply like the proprioceptors into the all that. Because you're not gonna do anything outside like if you don't train the motor learning system. Right? Talk to me about that.
Well, people would define motor learning different, but it's sort of neuroperceptual learning of how to execute the movement that's intended, and it's critical. It's really critical. He that what he was saying makes a lot of sense. It said even with the information, you still have to know how to deal with that. If you see a deficit, what are you going to do about that? It's sort of like Gary Gray would say, you can go get an MRI, and if they tell you you have cancer, that's you want to know that. But unless somebody can do something about it, it's not going to do you much good. And so it really boils down to um, understanding just what you said, that the resources that you need to build, the foundational resources of range of motion and strength and even explosive power have to be applied in a way that's functional to the sport. And you can't underemphasize that. The someone that's in your realm in basketball can't follow somebody else's protocol. They have to be looking at the sport and saying, hey, I see this as part of this. Think of NFL football, how many different positions there are, and how many different really functional aspects of the of that position are different from a down defensive lineman to an offensive receiver. And so, as I mentioned in the beginning, there has to be a foundational return to play and train for that. Uh, but there also has to be a task specific transformational zone, what you said that you've learned in gift, that's specific to all the different aspects of that sport. Now, the magic of doing something functional is the test, is the exercise. And the exercise is the test. And we can't emphasize that enough because if you said, if this is the test that we think you need to pass in order to go return to play and they don't pass or they're not ready for that, it's some version of that test tweaked becomes the exercise that you utilize to get them better. And that's what produces the motor training that he was referring to. Because motor training is going through a movement and the body learning how to execute it successfully. Which brings me to what I think might be my last point is once the person does it successfully, you have to force them to do it other ways. So you build that success to make it more what we call robust, that they can be successful in different environmental situations. They can dunk with both hands or one hand. They can dunk off one foot or both foot. They can dunk coming in from this angle and that angle. They can do it when someone bumps them. They can do it when they're catching the ball. They can do it when they already have the ball. All of those things are variations on a dunk that you would want to do the motor training for them to be able to do that. And the more robust you make it, the more they can come up with something novel because you're never going to be able to train them when someone comes in, they're starting to take off for a dunk because we're using this example, and someone comes slightly from behind on the right and pushes them on their pelvis versus someone somehow their foot catches on someone versus someone who comes up and meets them at their arm. You can't create a million scenarios, but you have to create enough so that they can create a novel solution. And that's what it does. When we train them to make this more robust, they'll be able to create a new solution, one that you've never trained them to do because they've never been exactly in that situation. But if they always do it the same way and successful way, that's great. And we're always happy when they do that. But the more they repeat that, the more you're restricting their creativity, their movement creativity, because they're always doing it the same way. And we can't let them always do it the same way.
Nice, nice. I love it. I love it. That's all the question I have for you. Believe it or not, in the last few weeks, I've been visiting different biomechanics lab, and I actually learned a lot more just by our conversation today, which is really awesome.
Well, that's great. And I enjoyed being with you. I always enjoy your questions, enjoy you, your smile, and the fact that you just want to learn more. You want to get better and better to serve your, in this case, basketball players. But it would be the same if you were working with hockey players or football players. But again, those three examples show you how, besides the general foundational, you have to be specific. You hockey players, you better do something on a very thin surface because you're on a blade. You're not on the ground, and so all the visual stuff comes in. I don't know enough about that, but there's all kinds of things. But it's been a lot of fun talking to you about this, and I hope the people who listen to the podcast get something out of it as well.
They will. They will.